Hello, Next Gen Global Leaders. It is so good to be here with you today. We have an exciting webinar for you with Joe Jordan joining us for an exciting workshop on critical decision making and for business success. So Joe comes from many years of experience working with Fortune 500 companies and many different organizations and backgrounds. I've known Joe maybe 10 years now. We met years ago, and it is a privilege to work with him and to have this time with him today. As we look at the Next Gen Global Leaders process, we know this is built off of Next Gen, which is not about age, it's about mindset. It's about a mindset of going forward as a global leader. And we've all been challenged over the last year with a pandemic, with global recession, with so much fluctuation and change. It has made it even more difficult. It's not like global leadership needed any more things to make it difficult, but it has gone up a good bit because of these issues. And so as we look at that, we want this mindset, this next gen mindset is based off of our 5 principles of global leadership. We have compassion, we have discipline, integrity and purpose and sacrifice. When you look at this workshop, we were trying to decide what category it would be in. And as I was thinking through it, I was like, I probably could put it in each one of those 5 principles, but really we're going to focus on the word purpose for today. And now that purpose is not just about, many times when you hear the word purpose, you're thinking about self-leadership and finding your own purpose. But what we're looking at here is in the organization. It could be a business, it could be a nonprofit, whatever the organization, there's a purpose behind it. Who are they wanting to go serve? How are they going to go serve them? How are they going to bring an impact, whether through profits, whether through hiring, whether through a great product, whatever it may be, there is a purpose behind it. Well, inside that purpose, you have to be a strategic leader. And in strategic leadership, when you dig down into strategic leadership, one of the acumens, one of the traits of a successful strategic leader is in getting a group together and having that strategy is the fact of being able to make critical decisions. And so as we sit back today and we hear Joe's presentation, just be thinking, we want to be able to apply this to your organization and to your business. And we're going to later on have opportunities as you watch this to send questions and to have more discussions down the road. So looking forward to having Joe on here to do his presentation. After his presentation, Joe and I will have a few minutes of discussion and dialogue where we try to bring it into a conversation to help us, help you, bring it into a context to help you in your organization. So that's the last part of today. Again, thank you so much for joining us. It's a blessing to have you here. And Joe, I've given you the background and everything of what we're doing at Next Gen Global Leaders. So I'm handing it over to you for your presentation. I look forward to hearing it.
Great, thanks, Jay. Let me just get us switched over to the presentation and get us set up there. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be with your group today and to talk about something that I spent a lot of time engaged with folks around, and that's this whole area of critical thinking and decision-making. Hopefully today, though we don't have the opportunity for us all to interact directly, I'm hopeful that my conversation with Jay as we're moving along will provide us the context to really try to apply some of these ideas within your organizations. In terms of my background, I can get this thing to move forward on me. There we go. My life has really been as now a speaker, trainer, author, and a retained training consultant with organizations. My career has been 30 plus years. When Jay said experience, that was really a nice way of saying he's old as all get out. But hopefully that'll not be the thing that gets in the way today. But really 30 plus years of sales and sales management and corporate operations, marketing and training experience, all in the professional services space. So spent some time in the staffing industry, spent a number of years working for Dell in the technology space. And for the last 6 years, I've really been working with a broad spectrum of companies from healthcare to technology to transportation to just about every industry around some of the key areas that we'll be talking about today. I'm a husband and a dad. My wife I've been married for 40 years. She should have chased me out of town a long time ago, but she's graciously put up with me for 40 years. My son's 30 years old, works for one of the airlines here in the US. Again, have the wonderful opportunity to travel as part of my job. So as my little picture for the India Gate shows, I've had a couple of chances to go work with clients in other parts of the globe. And it helps feed my love of photography. So it's a great opportunity to get that as part of my job. My areas of expertise are really four folks that I focus on primarily now, and that is leadership, critical thinking, communication, and sales acceleration. Today, as Jay said, we're going to focus on that critical thinking piece and really target three key things that I want us to target in on. Number one is why critical thinking is important in your business. Number two, the barriers to effective critical thinking. And number three, some tips for better critical thinking and some things we can do better around that. Now, none of us like to think we're not good critical thinkers. The reality is research shows us that most of us without some help aren't particularly adept at it. That most people, when you really get down to it, they struggle to some degree with this whole thing around critical thinking. And I find sometimes, especially with smaller business owners, those are folks that really don't want to think that they can't handle it all. Well, the truth is, folks, we can't. And all of us need other folks to bring some resources to bear on it. So my goal today is just give you some foundational tips that'll hopefully help you accelerate the process in your organization. So let's start out, first of all, talking about why is critical thinking so important? Well, number one is very pragmatic. We are wasting a ton of money across the globe right now. As you go back and look at the numbers from 2020, and these are global numbers, I believe, what we spent on mergers and acquisitions last year. Look at, we spent around 2.3 trillion, even 2.8 trillion rather, even with COVID. So yes, things dipped in second and third quarters, but they picked back up again as the year ended. Spent almost $3 trillion in M&A last year across the globe. The problem, and you can debate the number, and that's not the big issue. The big number I want to focus on is the middle one, because we spent 2.8 trillion, but ultimately wasted about 1.9 trillion of that. Why? Because we consistently are not adding value and we're failing in the transactions. And that's research that comes off from the last 4 years. You say, well, why are they not going through? When you look at the research around why our M&A investments aren't paying off, the things that are coming up are really this list of 7 things under the screen. As you look at that list, expectations, culture, strategy, integration, risk management, all of those things are directly driven by effective critical thinking. Now, you might spend more for something than you should have spent. You might have gotten a poor management team when you bought a company. Those things kind of come with the territory. But those other 5 things are really issues that we can fix. Yet I consistently, as I look at these numbers, and I update this every year, as we look at these numbers, we consistently see organizations are really failing to add value when their efforts to try to bring organizations together. So what that really comes down to is a lack of an effective critical thinking process, which is, of course, simply determining the causes of our problems, generating options, choosing solutions, and then anticipating the challenges that come with the solution. Now, often when you look at the print under these, you'll see that's really why we're having the challenge, is we determine cause because we can't agree on the problem. We have difficulty around the options because we don't have enough ideas of what a viable option would be. We choose a solution without really engaging in an effective decision process. And then we do the thing that many organizations fail at, and that is we just don't anticipate and plan for the problems we will create as we implement our solution. In other words, every solution carries with it some ramifications somewhere else in an organization. And so if we don't take the time to think that through, often that's the thing that gets in the way. So what are some barriers to effective critical thinking? Let's talk a little bit about those, and we'll walk through a few of these, and then I'll give you some ideas, and then Jay and I'll talk the subject over a little bit this afternoon. Number one, as I work with organizations, I find one of the key issues that becomes a barrier to effective critical thinking, and I asked this of groups multiple times. I did this workshop, I don't know how many times, with marketing organizations from some of the major companies across the globe. that as I talk with folks, consistently we find the priorities are conflicting across organizations. Priorities around digital transformation, how we use our time, our pace of and resistance to change, the excessive information we all have to deal with, and then sometimes just the challenges around having the right people engaged in the process and all of that. Now, when I started last year, that's all that was on the screen. And I thought, Joe, to be honest, you've got to include these other 4 boxes. And that is for all of us today, we're faced with the reality of what's the lasting impact of COVID-19? How is that going to change our business models? Zoom was a thing that a few of us knew about at the beginning of last year, and it's become a way of life. Either Zoom or WebEx or whatever your platform is become a way of life for us today. That it's as easy to jump on a call like this as it is to fly people around the globe. So we're clearly going to see a change in our business model. For many organizations, it's how's my business going to survive? Or if not just survive, how are we going to pivot and turn and innovate in this new situation? And ultimately, of course, the financial impact of all of this on the companies that we're working in, whether they're large or small, whatever the case might be. So often the conflict around these priorities creates an inability for us to really engage in effective critical thinking, coupled with often there's a lack of balance in organizations. Now, if I sat down with any one of you today and talked about the companies of which you were part, if your company's succeeding today, COVID or not COVID withstanding, it's because you're balancing these 5 things. Any successful company today balances these 5 business drivers. Any organization that's struggling today is struggling around one or more of these, whether it's the ability to generate cash through sales or however we generate revenue in our organization, obviously the need to deliver profitability to our shareholders, managing our assets effectively, growing, and then of course, taking care of the people. Now, I put those 5 up. They're not original with me, and they come out of a book that I really recommend that you get and read called Seeing the Big Picture by Kevin Cope. Brilliant little simple book on how you can understand how these business drivers fit together and how they impact your organization. But as you look at organizations today that have survived, they're ones who have figured out how to balance this. One of the great examples I like to take is an airline here in the States, Southwest Airlines, which is kind of legendary, especially here in Texas where I am. Southwest is a company that is known for the wonderful things they do for their people. And they have incredible profit sharing and just they're doing all kinds of stuff that people love to work in that organization. And it would be easy just to focus on that, but it's also important to recognize the fact that Southwest Airlines has been profitable every quarter of every year until 2020. And obviously they're in the airline industry and they're happy to be alive today. Interestingly enough, though, they are the first airline I've heard state that they think they're going to break even by June and be profitable by the end of the year again. Now, this is an organization that hasn't done away with all those people things in the process. They're figuring out how to balance not only achieving profit, but also taking care of people because all those other things are balancing in there together. And again, one of the key things that gets in the way of effective critical thinking is it's easy to get focused on one or the other. If all I do is focus on the people in my organization, everybody loves to work there. Unfortunately, I have shareholders who are expecting me to deliver profitability. If all I'm focused on is profitability and I'm not growing, then the company's out of balance there. So that little question in the middle of this diagram is one that's critical for every one of us to ask ourselves, and that is, how clearly does every person in your company know how their role impacts these business drivers? Whether they're in accounting, they're in sales, they're in operations, whatever they are in part of an organization, do they understand how their job impacts these 5 business drivers? A critical piece for us to be able to get a critical thinking culture built into our organization. Now, one of the other barriers is we just have a resistance to information. Everything that comes to you and me comes in our brain as either a threat or a reward. Now, if I share an idea with you and you perceive it to be threatening, a chemical gets released in your body and the energy moves away from the prefrontal cortex of your brain and your body gets ready to do one of 3 things: to fight, flight, or freeze. Now, when our ancestors were conquering the wild world that we emerged into, those fight, flight, and freeze things look different than they do now. But the fight, flight, and freeze still happens in conference rooms, on Zoom calls, telephone calls, whatever the case may be, when I see information coming at me as a threat. Now, the bad news, folks, is something really important happens in that prefrontal cortex of your brain. That's where logic and reasoning and decision-making take place. So if we're needing to engage in critical thinking and I perceive you're coming at me as a threat in terms of the idea you're presenting, we're going to have a hard time engaging in critical thinking together. Now, if on the other hand, I can see something as a reward, another little bucket of chemicals gets released in my mind, the energy activates that prefrontal cortex, and logic, reason, and critical thinking all kick in. So one of the key things we need to be able to do, and I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a few minutes, is be able to help folks see things as a reward rather than a threat. Now, another little thing that kicks in the way is often we have incomplete perspectives. Now, this is a quick thing you can do with yourself while I'm walking through here, and just ask yourself real quickly, is the section labeled B the same color as A? Now, as I work with folks, most people would say, no, A is a slightly different color than B. The reality is if I put that little bar across the middle, and that's all I've done to the picture is put that little brown bar in the middle, those two sections are virtually the same color. I haven't changed the color at all. I'm just clicking back for a second, didn't change the color, just put that bar across the middle. And what that shows us, folks, that you and I often have an incomplete perspective because the colors around us in this picture begin to cloud the reality of what is there. And we think we're seeing one thing, but we really aren't. Interestingly enough, if I do that with a blue bar or a green bar, it doesn't work. I have to use that kind of brownish color that's in the foreground of the picture. And I think it really illustrates what happens for us in organizations is all the noise around us gets in the way, and we think we're seeing things that we maybe really aren't. That even becomes more so when we get caught up in the distractions. There's a little sequence in this picture you can complete using two straight lines. And I'll just challenge you to think for just a minute. Can you see the sequence that's in this picture? So sequence meaning A, B, C, D, E, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. You see a sequence in the picture? Probably not. As I do this with most folks, most people don't see the sequence. So I'd suggest, well, let's just turn it upside down for a minute. Now, turning upside down may or may not help you. Sometimes it does, because when we look at a rectangle with rectangles in it, our brains often tell us, oh, that's a building. And we try to look for a sequence within the building. But if I suggest to you that the rectangles have nothing to do with what we're looking for, the sequence has everything to do with what's at the bottom of the picture, and we begin to look there, begin to realize, oh, yeah, there is a sequence. U, V, W, two short straight lines make X and Y. Now, if you didn't get that, you're like most people. Why? Because most of us see what is familiar in a situation and fail to see the differences. And often in organizations, when we're engaged in critical thinking, we get distracted with what is familiar. We get distracted with the way we did it before. And we fail to realize, as I tell organizations, this is not that. The situation you're dealing with now may look like something you've been through before. It may seem like it, but in the constantly changing world we're in, folks, this is not that. There's always a nuance of difference, and you need to be careful that you don't get caught up in the noise, get distracted by the noise, and fail to see the difference that's really there. So how can we engage in critical thinking more effectively? Let me give you a few quick tips, and then Jay and I will bat this idea and talk about it a little bit. Number one is promote cognitive diversity. What is cognitive diversity? It's simply embracing and valuing the differences in experience, knowledge, expertise, background that you have across your organization. This is adapted from something that came out of Harvard Business Review, and I kind of adjusted it a little bit to fit more what I want to do here. But it really looks at these two axioms of cognitive diversity and psychological safety. In other words, the diversity of experience and thought in our organization and the safety in which we allow people to operate. In other words, the environment we create in which folks can engage in that diversity. Now, if I have lots of diversity and no safety, we have that oppositional environment where we're cautious, we're controlling, we defer to the hierarchy and kind of hide behind it. We become resistant to change. If, on the other hand, we have both a low level of diversity and low level of safety, that's when we all get defensive. We become self-protective, we're risk adverse, we delay decisions saying that we're trying to manage the risk, when really we're trying to find some way to work around the uncertainty that is part of the decision. We also often call it risk management. It's really not. we're just uncertain. We don't know what to do. So we keep looking for more data to back up our decision. If, on the other hand, the bottom right corner, we have a high level of safety and little diversity, we all have a nice time. We are considerate, we're conciliatory, but unfortunately, we're also conflict adverse and we're very unimaginative. And we stay stuck where we are because we can't imagine anything different than the world we've been in, or we're not willing to engage in the difficult conversations so we can move things forward. I was just on a call this morning with the vice president of the company, and we were talking about their organization and the need for them to be able to engage in a very difficult conversation with another leader. Why? Because that's what's going to make them a healthy company. Tough thing to do, difficult conversation to have, one that's critical for it. And if all I have is the safety, but not the diversity, I won't go into that. What we want is that transforming environment where we're curious, inquiring, innovative, we'll take appropriate risks because that's going to move us forward, especially in this kind of new world that we're finding ourselves in as we come out of COVID and try to figure out how are we going to do business now in 2021. You see, if you and I both think the same way, one of us is unnecessary. We need to have that diversity of thought, and so we need to encourage it in our organizations if we want to have a good critical thinking culture. Secondly, we need to be able to answer the most important question. And in critical thinking, the most important question is simply this: what is the problem we're trying to solve? Here's a little exercise for you. The next time you sit down with your leadership team or folks in your organization and you're trying to solve a problem, or you know you need to work through something, before you ever start, either do it in chat on Zoom or chat on WebEx, or do it with pieces of paper in the room. But just ask everybody before you ever start, write down in one sentence what you think the problem is that we are trying to solve. And then pull those all together and just read them without sorting them through, just read them out. I will guarantee you right there, you're going to find part of the problem, because you're going to find people don't agree on the problem you're trying to solve. And folks, if you don't agree on the problem you're trying to solve, you're never going to agree on the solution you choose to fix it. People often say, oh, we're having a difficult time making a decision. If they would back that up, they'll find really it isn't the decision that's difficult. It's we didn't ever agree on the problem we're trying to solve. So make sure there's agreement there before you move forward. So once you've agreed on the problem, then you can be careful in how you frame the problem. And framing the problem has everything to do with how we're going to approach it. I'm just going to take us out of context. Put yourself in a large city, wherever you are today, and you're involved in managing a big high-rise office building somewhere in your geography in the world. And you're getting complaints from your tenants that the elevator is too slow. Well, if the elevator is really too slow, we have one solution to that, don't we? And that is make the elevator faster, which means I've got two options. They're really expensive. Either install a faster elevator or upgrade the one I have. What happens though if we pause and rather than go do that expensive solution, just ask our customer, why do you say the elevator's too slow? And they tell us, well, I just find it annoying to wait in your elevator. Now that is not a very different problem. If the problem is the elevator is too slow, I have one solution: make it faster one way or the other. If it's people find it annoying to wait in the elevator, then I just need to find some way to make the ride seem faster. So we can install mirrors and air conditioning and play music or news television or create an illusion, whatever we want to do. At the heart of that is that little word in orange, folks, and that is getting comfortable asking why. Back in the days of the quality initiative around the globe, there was this idea of the 5 whys of quality. And the idea was this, that when someone comes to you with a problem and you ask them why, and they give you an answer, and you ask them why again, and they give you an answer, and you ask them why a third time and a fourth time and the fifth time. By the time we get to the fifth answer, we're probably getting to the root cause of the problem. Because often we tend to focus, as I'll talk about in a moment, on the noise, and we don't really get to the root cause. So get comfortable when someone comes to it a problem, making sure you're asking why so that we frame the problem properly. Because if it's just that the elevator is too slow, I've got an expensive option. If it's something else, then I've got a lot of other options. Let's take something a little closer to home. Revenue is shrinking. Welcome to every company nearly on the planet today. Revenue is shrinking. Well, if that's the problem, then the solution is obviously I need to sell more of whatever we sell. So it's sort of back to, we joke about it in sales management. It's the idea of I have a salesperson who's underperforming and I say, what are you doing? Your numbers aren't up. What are you doing? And he tells me, I say, well, then do more of it. And we call that sales coaching. The issue here is not to just do more of it, but to again, ask ourselves why. And in asking why, I find out really our go-to-market strategy doesn't fit the current market. That solution means we need to adapt and pivot the strategy. So adjust the process, create a new process, innovate, whatever the case may be. Very different than just selling more of the same thing. If I ask why and find out our customers don't like what we're selling, or our customers don't like our company, or our customers don't like engaging with our customer service representatives, that's a whole nother solution than just selling more stuff. And so again, a critical part of this, folks, to be effective on the critical thinking side is to, agree on the problem and then make sure we're framing the problem so we're really focusing on the real issue. Why? Because often we get caught up in the noise, whether it's the environmental noise, symptoms, other issues, distractions, and we really often don't get to the root cause. I've been teaching critical thinking now for 15 plus years, and I found folks, and I find it just in experience of life in general, symptoms make noise, root causes often do not. Symptoms make a lot of noise, root causes often do not, which is why we tend to push and push on something we think should fix a problem and really doesn't. And there's a wonderful book, Peter Singay's book, The Fifth Discipline. He makes a great statement there. He said, pushing harder and harder on familiar solutions while fundamental problems persist or worsen is a reliable indicator of non-systemic thinking. In other words, you keep saying this should fix the problem and it doesn't. Back up and make sure you're really looking at the entire system of systems. You're looking at all the issues in your organization. You're not just addressing noise or symptoms or some other extraneous thing, and you're really focusing on where your energy needs to go to begin to really engage in the critical thinking that can help you solve the real problem. If you're a mystery reader, you remember Sherlock Holmes. Sir Conan Doyle says it well. He said, when you've eliminated all which is impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Now, that's sort of extrapolating from the writer of fiction. It's very, very true from a critical thinking standpoint. Get all the stuff that's impossible, all the noise out of the way. Whatever remains, however unlikely, is probably getting you very close to the root cause of the issue. Another thing we can do, folks, is mitigate our limiting mindsets. Recognize, as I said, we can see that threat or reward thing. So one of the ways to counteract that then is just do some things that will mitigate our tendency to limit our mindset, to not engage in that cognitive diversity. So that's embracing uncertainty, complexity, nuance. It's analyzing your data continuously and constantly updating it. It's evaluating your decision criteria to make sure it's still relevant. And then simply rethinking what you think. Many of us think we're thinking, and all we're doing is just rearranging yesterday's ideas. Make sure you're engaged in some fresh thought and that you're welcoming fresh thought, even as uncomfortable as it might be for you. You can tell by the gray hair, I've been in the corporate life a few years, and it can be a tendency at this stage in one's career to say, I want to limit the rethinking of what I'm thinking. I've already thought it through once. Folks, that's the fastest way I know to kill an organization, is when the leadership stops thinking they need to rethink where they're at. That's the road that an organization's on to end up with its demise. The companies that are surviving today, the companies that have found out how to perhaps even thrive in the midst of COVID, or the organizations that have pivoted, the organizations that have rethought themselves and have found a new way to emerge out of this. Now, I realize that's a broad generalization for many folks who are still just struggling to survive. But for many companies, it's been a matter of just thinking differently about their business, which is allowing them to find a new way to accomplish what they need to. So leverage a critical thinking blueprint then, folks, of framing your problems, generating options, choosing and prioritizing your solutions, and then implementing those solutions while you anticipate the challenges they'll bring forward. That's really the whole process we want to engage in. Now, that process can go forward or backward, meaning when I get over to generating options and I realize I'm not sure I still have the core issue of the problem, I back up. Or if I get down to choosing solutions and I realize I don't have enough good ones, I'm going to come back up and generate some more options. It's not a one-way process. It goes either direction, but it needs to be a fluid process built around our ability to really, first of all, frame and get at the heart of the problem. One writer said, nothing's more dangerous than an idea when it's the only one you have. And we want to be careful from a critical thinking standpoint that we not only just have one idea, but we just have one way to sort through stuff. A variety of things, a variety of critical thinking tools can help us begin to engage in that more effectively. So having said that, Jay, let's have a conversation about this. I'm done talking about things. I'm going to move this around so I can see you again, sir. Let's have a conversation.
Sounds good. So as I was listening, excellent job, Joe. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation. I learned a lot, and so I was having to take notes on things that I was applying, and then trying to get the questions down at the same time. So I appreciate the presentation and sharing your thoughts on decision making, critical decision making. As you look at there's a few areas I want to touch on first to help us try to bring this in a context of mainly the people who will be watching, which we'll say mostly Asia, in the Asia area, some in Africa. We think about leadership and communication, your ability to communicate as a leader, and this threat and reward, which was really good. The whole how your brain responds to threat and reward and ability to think critically. How do you communicate? So, especially in the hierarchical, because most of these questions is based off of a hierarchical strategy that we see mostly in Asia, very top down strategy. How do you communicate without it sounding like a threat every time? How would you go about and making it sound like more of a reward, so they can definitely start having those chemical reactions, so they can think critically better than a threat?
Well, I think one of the key things, Jay, is I don't start by saying you're wrong. That's probably, a given, but that's one of the starting points is again, recognizing, again, it's not that I'm going to dive right into the conflict. It's one of the things I find, and I think if universally we could do this right now, it would be better for all of us. And that is recognizing that whenever I get in a situation where I'm with someone where they're seeing it differently, especially someone who's higher than me in the organization, is I like to get to it by asking questions. So it'd be a matter of saying, you're my boss, I work for you, Jay. And I'll say, Jay, that's a really interesting perspective. Can you help me understand how you came to that conclusion? Or I see it slightly differently. How did you arrive at that conclusion? So I understand your thought process, at which point then I say, would you be open to another possibility? So I'm not confronting you. I'm not threatening you. I'm not saying your idea is bad. I'm trying to understand your idea. And perhaps in doing that, I'm going to change the way I'm going to approach it because I realize there's a whole piece of information here you have that I don't have. Or in the process of that, I'm going to come and say, that's an interesting viewpoint. Would it be possible for us to expand that and look at it slightly differently to see if we can get a better result? I think at the heart of that, again, comes to that other little diagram, especially if I'm below you in the organization. Can I show that my idea will positively impact the 5 business drivers? There's where I see often a gap as well, is people come to a senior leader saying, here's my great idea, and they've never made the connection to how's that going to impact cash, profit, assets, growth, or people. And if I can tie it to that, I think there's a much better likelihood you'll at least give me an audience to consider the idea rather than just shut me down because you feel it to be a threat.
And that goes to the second question when we look at strategic leadership of this, assessing that everyone is understand those the 5 areas, the balance areas that you gave in business or organization, which is important. When we say business, that could be a nonprofit too, because the fundraising is just like sales in a sense. Yes. It's this, you got to know what cash is coming in so you can invest it in people and the resources. So as you look at that, how do you go about the assessment? How would you go about it? So you're coming in, you're helping the organization. They've been hierarchical since the beginning. the leaders trying to make a difference, rethinking, like what you were saying there at the end. They're trying to rethink, grow the organization in a different way, because COVID has put pressure on us. If we've been exposed as business people as with COVID, because we can't do it alone, we need help. And so how do you go in to assess the situation and try to get everyone on board and knowing where they are in those areas?
Well, and I think, from a consulting standpoint, Jay, I can sort of tell how connected a leadership group is if I start asking those questions. Because sometimes if you start asking questions about cash, profit, assets, growth, people, and people's faces get a little blank or they don't have a lot to say, that tells me, and not to be judgmental, but that tells me this leadership group needs some thinking process to change, because they're probably not thinking about their business the way they really need to. Or perhaps there's just an educational opportunity there. Again, I think it's if folks in an organization can come in and engage with, I know we need to be concerned about these 5 things. This idea, I think, will help us here. If you have a leadership team that's running their business the way they ought to, they're going to be focused there. And candidly, if they don't care about those, Jay, that's a great idea to start looking for another job, because that company's not going to be around. And it's true. I'm glad you said it for nonprofit, because I get a little agitated, if I can use that word, when I talk with someone who says, well, we're a nonprofit, we don't care about profitability. And I'm going, I bet if I got with the folks leading your nonprofit, they care about profitability, because they want to be around tomorrow. And yes, we're not talking about sales, and we're not talking about, delivering huge bonuses for the leadership team. We are talking, though, about our sustainability. And that requires getting more money in the door than we send out the door. That's how it works. So again, I think it's just getting comfortable with that conversation. That's where I think that little book, Kevin Cope's book, is just brilliant, because it's, $25. I think I saw it for $10 on Amazon recently. Short little book. It just helps you understand how all those fit together so beautifully.
Yeah, that's something people who are watching and joining us, we'll ask some discussion questions down the road, and if you reply to that, and maybe we can get that book to you. So look at some of that reward. So we want to reward. We want to have your the right thinking for your critical thinking. Thank you for sharing that. And you brought up the whole team aspect, and that's been one of the things I've been trying to teach overseas for 15 years, and it is a struggle. Because I understand most have grown up and worked in this hierarchical structure of an organization, but the times are changing. We just did 2 seminars on multi-generational workforce issues and challenges in Cambodia and Vietnam, and we're seeing the same thing. The younger generation, millennials, Generation Z, whatever you down the line, they're wanting to be on the team, and they want those 2 things you listed. They want diversity, cognitive diversity, and they want safety. And Google found that out in their research, right? What makes a great team at Google? Psychological safety. So if you're consulting, if you're giving that feedback to them, you're trying to rethink the organization, reframe the organization, and to bring that team process in there. How do you come about helping with that whole diversity? Because you're working on the threat and reward communication. You are setting up the balance where everyone is seeing their role, and then now is the team building aspect that's coming in. How do you go about doing that?
I'm glad you said what you did about millennials and the younger generations, because I honestly spend more time with that group of people than I spend with my peer group. So I really, we sort of joke about it. My wife and I have not that many close friends who are our age. Most of our friends are, 30 years-ish or younger. And so we spend a lot of time with that group. And I spend a lot of time sitting on conversations like this and teaching workshops with that age group. And I think there's 2 things there. And having worked with, colleagues across the pond in India, going there and working with companies there. One of the things I think Westerners need to understand is we're not going to change the Eastern mindset. So that's been around a whole lot longer than the West has been around. So understand that we're not going to change that mindset. What we do need and can do, I think, is help folks integrate into it more effectively. And yes, every part of the world is having to rethink how they engage with folks. But one of the things I tell the younger audiences, Jay, is they need to understand part of it is they're extremely threatening. If I'm 50 years old, technology came into my world at some point in time. I can still remember the day my first IBM computer appeared on my desk. I thought I could rule the world from that thing. My phone has more computing power than my IBM computer had. It certainly has far more memory than it had. But for most folks, 45, 50 years or older, computing technology came into their world at a point in time. They didn't come out of the womb with a cell phone in their hand. And so there is a level in which I tell younger audiences, you need to understand you are somewhat threatening to the people you work for. And so you need to be mindful of that as you're whirling technology around them. It doesn't mean they don't understand it, just understand that you can kind of come off a little bit arrogant at times, which again creates the threat, going back to that, because I'm threatening you with my knowledge that you don't have. So I think there's just a need for the younger audiences to be respectful and engaging at the same time. And then for those of us in leadership to recognize we kind of have a choice at this point, Jay. We can say we're going to keep doing it the way we've always done it, and we will not attract the talent we need. Or we can say, maybe I need to adjust as well without doing away with that which has been in place for thousands of years, just recognizing, I like to tell folks, I need to adapt my style without denying my uniqueness. So we are who we are, and we need to recognize the need to adapt the way we engage if we're going to be around for the long haul. And I think we'll see in the next 5, 7, 10 years, the companies that refuse, the leaders who refuse to adapt, are the leaders who are going to have the subpar talent in their organizations, because the folks who are really talented are going to go somewhere where their ideas are valued and welcomed. And I see that as I work with any kind of organization.
Yeah, recently I've been reading a book by Reed Hastings, founder of Netflix or co-founder of Netflix, and No Rules Rules. And he talks a lot about talent density. And I think that's what you're talking about here is we've got to build organizations that with talent density, meaning that if this person wants to do the best job, we've got to get more people in there that want to do the best job so they will work together. If not, we're finding problems with the team performance and everything else. So critical thinking and this type of process, how do you make sure the right people are on teams, and how do you go about that process to make sure they're able to communicate to each other their ideas without threatening? Just that candid feedback or ability to have a discussion. And like I thank you for bringing up the Asian context. It's more is the dialogue in a sense of you're not criticizing them personally. You're just discussing the issue so you can come to a solution.
Yeah, and I I am no means an expert. Gratefully, when I've been able to go work, with my colleagues in India, it's been for extended periods of time, like 2.5 weeks or 10 days at a time, not just, I popped over, I did a workshop and I flew back. I was there for days, in which I've really tried to understand how do we contextualize this stuff so it will work in any culture. And again, it really comes down to the leadership. And I'm grateful that I've worked with organizations where their leadership has said, we realize we have to adapt if we want this talent here. And the other side of, the talent recognizing how they're going to engage successfully. So I think, the selection process today is changing. I was just having a conversation with someone about that today as well, in terms of, because of the huge competition for talent, it doesn't mean we drop the bar. It's just we have to look differently at how we're selecting talent, where we're finding that talent. considering perhaps different areas to get the talent than we've had before. And again, we use the words a lot from a diversity standpoint. I think it's also just overall is you think of diversity and equality and inclusion, and then this idea of belonging. We have to create an environment, if we want people on the team, in which they feel like they can belong there and be who they really are. And again, that puts the weight back on leadership to say, are you willing to adapt to change the environment so that these people want to be there? Because again, if they're not, they're going to go somewhere else. But I think it's a matter of evaluating folks for not only the hard skills that we've looked for. Okay, do you have the resume per se? But really having conversations with them about, tell me about a time when you faced a problem you just couldn't sort out. How did you come with an answer for it? Because one of the things we're finding, and I have this conversation with my millennial son, is he went through a great education in a private university in the Dallas area and got 2 degrees. And he was taught there is a right answer, find it. And he's now coming into a global world in which there's so much ambiguity, and finding the only answer is a lot harder. And I think part of our education system sets young people up for failure today because we're being taught, in this, here in the state of Texas, we're testing, we're teaching to the test. Well, if that's the case, they're suddenly going to get out in the real world where the answer key is not out there. And I need to be able to hire folks who can engage in critical thinking. And candidly, critical thinking continues to be a lacking skill that leaders tell us they see in the folks coming into the workforce. So I'd be screening for that so I can get as much talent around that as I can, but also as an organization, as leadership, making sure I'm willing to flex and change the way I'm approaching things to benefit from the younger approaches to it.
And that leads into my final area. We started with the leadership and communication, and strategic leadership, and then team leadership. And this last one is just self-leadership. Mm-hmm. What you were talking about, you want to be able to grow your own critical thinking skills because, you might not have been taught, you might not have been in the education system, you might not have had the chance to go to university, but you've been placed in the area where you have a purpose and you're trying to grow the organization. And you want to grow your critical thinking skills. When you think about priorities and time and those type of things, where do you start, and like for yourself leadership and to be able to grow as a critical thinker?
I sort of, one quick thing is, okay, invest time in thinking a new thought every day. That's a good starting point, Jay. Yeah. It's like, let's think something different about something every day. That's just, the entry ticket, as it were. But I say that because, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was agreeing. That was good.
Because it's often that's the case. Again, I think I'm thinking, but I'm really just rearranging what I already think. So I think it's that. I think it's reading widely. I try to do that. At this stage, because I'm double COVID vaccinated, I actually went somewhere on spring break. And while I was sitting on an airplane with my mask on, I read through the Harvard Business Review and stretched my thinking. There are 2 or 3 articles in there. In fact, I came back home and I copied and sent the link to one of them to a client. And I said, this seems to be exactly where you are these days. I encourage you to read it. And the client came back and said, you're right. We need to talk about this. And so it's continued to expose myself to new thinking, to try to apply the tools. And I tell folks, and I've done this through all the years I've been in corporate training, Jay, is I don't teach stuff that only works at work. I teach things that work anywhere. And to me, that's the test of the value of a principle. The value of idea is, does it have application outside of some limited little context? And so there's nothing I've talked about here in this conversation that couldn't be applied in my life every day. That when we sit down and we're dealing with an issue at home and, I'm having conflict across the dinner table. Hey, what do you think the problem is that we're trying to solve? That's going to get us to a faster solution. Or we're sitting down and we're trying to come up with some ideas to engage in good, critical thinking brainstorming process. Or, I just helped a client pick a new learning management system by using a decision matrix. So it's just looking for ways to apply it all the time. And I've been doing that throughout my training career, and it's really paid off for me. And I think it's paid off for the folks I've worked with, where it's just, yeah, this will work on Saturday. I've done that, taking my vehicle in to get it worked on. I said, okay, I think it's this, and here's why. Because it's that, but it's not that, and it's that, but it's not, and it's just the critical thinking process that leads you down to, I think it's got to be this. And sure enough, for a guy that doesn't know a lot about cars, you can come down with a pretty good choice out of that.
Yes, very good. So wow, great time. Like I said, I learned a lot in this, and very helpful for my own life, as what you were talking about, being able to apply it. And thank you so much for sharing. Earlier, if people want to go back and rewind, and we'll post it also, you had your email on there,
Yes,
and you had a phone number. Are you on WhatsApp by any chance with
I'm not.
your phone
I'm
number,
not.
or you're
Nope,
not?
I'm
Okay,
not.
so
But
email would be the best way.
reach out on email. Happy to connect that way, and then we can come up with some. I live on Zoom these days, so happy to do a Zoom
Yeah.
call if they want face to face. But yeah, absolutely, reach out to me. Love to engage in a conversation, Jay.
Okay, that is great. Well, Joe, thank you for your time. God bless, and have a good day.
My pleasure. Great to be with you all. Thanks very much for the opportunity.